The dust from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Penelope Bradford climbed down with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a quiet determination that had carried her across 3 states. Austin, Texas in 1878 was a place where questions came faster than answers, but she had learned long ago not to offer more information than people needed, and never to ask for anything she couldn't provide for herself first. The boarding house on Congress Avenue smelled of lye soap and bacon grease, and the landlady, Mrs. Henderson, looked her up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had seen too many women arrive in this town with hope in their hearts and empty pockets. Penelope met her gaze without flinching, counted out the coins for 2 weeks' rent, and asked only for the smallest room available. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly at that, perhaps recognizing something familiar in a woman who knew her own limitations. "There's a seamstress shop 2 streets over that might need help," Mrs. Henderson offered, pocketing the coins. "Mrs. Yang has more work than she can handle with all the cattle barons' wives wanting fancy dresses for the spring socials." Penelope thanked her with genuine warmth, took the key to room 7, and climbed the narrow stairs with her bag. The room was barely large enough for the iron bed frame and washstand, but the window overlooked the street, and the afternoon light came through clean glass. She had lived in worse places, slept in barns when necessary, and worked her fingers raw in factory jobs back east before her aunt's death had freed her from an obligation she had never asked for but had honored nonetheless. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to unpack her 3 dresses, 1 pair of spare boots, her sewing kit, and the leather-bound book of pressed flowers her mother had given her before the fever took her. Then she washed her face in the basin, pinned her dark blonde hair back into a simple bun, and went to find the seamstress shop before the day grew any older. Mrs. Yang was a compact woman with quick hands and shrewd eyes who asked 3 questions, watched Penelope sew a straight seam and a blind hem, and hired her on the spot for 6 days a week at fair wages. Penelope accepted without negotiation, knowing the rate was honest and that trust had to be earned before anything else. That evening she ate a simple supper at the boarding house table with the other residents, a collection of clerks, a school teacher, and a widow who worked at the general store. She listened more than she spoke, learned the rhythm of the town through their conversations, and excused herself early to sleep the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who had finally stopped running. 3 weeks passed in a comfortable pattern of work, modest meals, and the kind of peace that comes from expecting nothing beyond what each day provided. Mrs. Yang proved to be exacting but fair, and Penelope's skill with difficult fabrics and intricate stitching earned her steady employment and a small raise. She bought a new pair of gloves with her first full wages, practical brown leather that would last through multiple winters, and felt wealthy in a way that had nothing to do with the remaining coins in her pocket. It was a Thursday afternoon when Lucas Sterling walked into the shop with a torn jacket over his arm and an apologetic expression that suggested he would rather face down a rattlesnake than ask for help with mending. He was tall and rangy with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting, and he held his hat in his hands with the careful courtesy of a man who had been raised with manners even if his current profession didn't require them. "Madam," he addressed Mrs. Yang, then noticed Penelope at the work table near the window. His eyes were an unexpected gray, like storm clouds over the hill country. "I've got a jacket that caught on barbed wire, and I'm hoping it can be salvaged. It belonged to my father." Mrs. Yang was elbow-deep in pinning a ball gown and gestured toward Penelope without looking up. "Miss Bradford handles repairs. She'll take care of you." Penelope set down the hem she was stitching and approached, holding out her hand for the jacket. It was good leather, worn soft with age and work, with a tear along the shoulder seam that had pulled several inches of stitching loose. She examined it in the light, testing the integrity of the surrounding leather. "I can repair this," she said simply. "The leather is still strong. It will take reinforcement along the seam, but it will hold." "What's the cost?" Lucas asked, and she named a fair price that made him nod with what looked like relief. "That's more than reasonable. When can I pick it up?" "Saturday afternoon, if that suits you." "Saturday's perfect. I'm Lucas Sterling, by the way. I work the Patterson Ranch north of town." Penelope Bradford. She met his eyes briefly, then returned her attention to the jacket, running her fingers along the seam to assess the work needed. I'll take good care of it. I can see that. He settled his hat back on his head. Thank you, Miss Bradford. After he left, Mrs. Yang glanced up from her pinning with a knowing expression. Lucas Sterling is a good man. Been working that ranch for 5 years, saved every penny, and just bought his own land west of the river. His father died in the war, and his mother passed 2 winters ago. He doesn't come to town much, but when he does, he pays his debts and causes no trouble. Penelope absorbed this information without comment, recognizing it for what it was, an endorsement from someone whose opinion carried weight in this community. She folded the jacket carefully and set it aside with a tag noting the repair needed, then returned to her hemming. That evening, she worked on the jacket in her room by lamplight, taking extra care with each stitch. It was not because Lucas Sterling had gray eyes and a respectful manner, she told herself, but because the jacket had belonged to his father and deserved the kind of attention that honored that history. The leather softened under her hands, and she reinforced the seam with a backing piece that would distribute any future stress, then worked a line of tight stitching that would hold against whatever demands ranch work required. Saturday arrived with unseasonable heat that had everyone moving slower and seeking shade. Penelope finished the morning's work and had just wrapped Lucas's jacket in brown paper when the shop door opened and he walked in, looking like he had ridden hard and fast to make it before closing time. Afternoon, Miss Bradford. He removed his hat, and she noticed his hair was damp with sweat at the temples. I hope I'm not too late. Your timing is perfect. She handed him the wrapped package and accepted his payment. The seam is reinforced. It should hold up to regular wear now. He unwrapped the package right there, examining her work with careful attention that suggested he knew quality when he saw it. When he looked up, there was genuine appreciation in his expression. This is excellent work. Better than it was originally, I'd wager. He hesitated, then said in a rush, Miss Bradford, I wonder if you might do me the honor of joining me for supper this evening. There's a restaurant on Pecan Street that serves a decent steak, and I'd like to show my gratitude for the care you took with this jacket. Penelope's first instinct was to decline, as she had declined the handful of other invitations she had received since arriving in Austin. She had learned to be self-sufficient, to expect nothing from others, and to keep her life simple and unencumbered. But something in Lucas Sterling's honest gray eyes and the genuine nature of his invitation made her pause. That's kind of you, she said slowly, but the repair work was simply my job. You don't owe me anything beyond the payment. I know I don't owe you. He met her gaze steadily, but I'm asking anyway if you're willing. She considered him for a long moment. This rancher with his father's mended jacket and his straightforward manner. There was no presumption in his stance, no expectation that she would say yes, just a simple question that she was free to answer however she chose. All right, she said finally. I'd be pleased to join you for supper. The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise, slow and warming. I'll call for you at 6 if that's agreeable. Where are you staying? The boarding house on Congress Avenue. I know it. I'll see you at 6 then. He nodded to her, then to Mrs. Yang, and left with the jacket tucked under his arm. Mrs. Yang made a satisfied sound. That young man has been alone too long. It's good he's finally taking notice of the world beyond his ranch. Penelope returned to her work without commenting, but her hands were less steady than usual as she pinned the next hem. She had not expected this, had not planned for the possibility of connection in a place she had chosen specifically because it asked nothing of her beyond honest work. But Lucas Sterling had asked, and she had said yes. And now the afternoon stretched ahead with an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation in her chest. At 6 o'clock precisely, Lucas arrived at the boarding house in a clean shirt with his hair still damp from washing, smelling of soap and sun-dried cotton. Penelope wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that she had made herself, with her mother's cameo pinned at her throat. Mrs. Henderson watched them leave with an approving nod, and Penelope felt the weight of the town's attention settling around them like a tangible thing. The restaurant was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of grilled meat and fresh bread. Lucas held her chair, waited until she was settled before taking his own seat, and ordered with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly what he wanted but checked first if she had preferences. Over steak and potatoes, they talked with the careful politeness of two people learning each other's boundaries. He told her about his ranch, 500 acres of good grazing land with a creek that ran year-round, and the house he was building himself, working evenings and Sundays when the ranch work allowed. "It's not much yet," he admitted, cutting his steak with precise movements. "Just 4 rooms and a porch, but it's solid. Good foundation, tight roof. I'm building it to last, not just to serve for now." "That sounds like a worthy goal," Penelope said. "Too many things these days are built for convenience rather than permanence." "Exactly." He looked pleased that she understood. "My father always said if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right the first time. Takes longer, requires more effort, but you don't have to do it twice." She smiled at that, recognizing the philosophy she had applied to her own life without quite putting it into those words. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Lucas's expression grew distant for a moment. "Died at Shiloh when I was 12. Never got to see the land I bought, but I like to think he would have approved of it." "I'm certain he would have," Penelope said quietly, and something in her tone made Lucas look at her with new attention. "You've lost people too," he said, not quite a question. "My mother when I was 16, my father before I could remember him, and my aunt last year, which is why I came to Texas. There was nothing left for me back in Ohio after she passed. I'm sorry for your losses." He said it simply, without the flowery condolences that often made grief feel cheapened. "But I'm glad circumstances brought you here." They lingered over coffee, talking more easily now about safer topics, books they had read, the peculiarities of Texas weather, the way Austin was growing faster than anyone had predicted. Lucas had a dry sense of humor that emerged slowly, and Penelope found herself laughing more than she had in months, genuine laughter that came from comfort rather than politeness. When he walked her back to the boarding house, the evening air was soft and warm, and the streets were quieter now that the day's business had ended. At the door, he held his hat in his hands again, that same gesture she was coming to recognize as his tell when he was uncertain. "I'd like to call on you again, Miss Bradford, if you would permit it." Penelope looked at him in the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows, this man who built his house to last and mended his father's jacket, and asked for nothing he hadn't earned. Something in her chest, a tight knot she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there, loosened slightly. "I'd like that, Mr. Sterling." "Lucas," he said. "Please call me Lucas." "Then you should call me Penelope." His smile was softer this time, more intimate. "Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Lucas." She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him quickly down the street toward the livery stable where he had left his horse. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the stars over Austin and trying to understand what had shifted inside her. The next 3 months unfolded with the steady progression of seasons. Lucas called on her every Saturday evening, and sometimes on Wednesday afternoons if his work allowed him to get to town early. They fell into a pattern of long walks and simple suppers, conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical, and a growing comfort in each other's presence that needed no words to validate it. He showed her his land on a warm Sunday in May, riding out together on horses he had borrowed from the livery. The property was everything he had described, rolling grassland with good water and a view that stretched all the way to the hills. The house stood half-finished in a grove of live oaks, its frame solid and true, walls rising with the kind of careful craftsmanship that spoke of patience and skill. "I'm thinking the kitchen should face east," he told her, walking her through the skeleton of rooms. "To catch the morning light, and the porch should wrap around the south side where the breeze comes through in summer." Penelope walked through the space, imagining walls and windows, the placement of furniture, the way light would fall through doorways. She stopped herself from offering suggestions, not wanting to presume, but Lucas noticed her hesitation. "What are you thinking?" "I was just noticing that if you extended the porch another 6 feet, you could put a swing there, in the corner. It would catch both the morning and evening breeze." He looked where she was pointing, his expression thoughtful. "That's a good idea. A very good idea." He paused, then added quietly, "I'd be grateful for any other thoughts you might have. I want this house to be right." So she walked through it again, this time speaking her observations aloud. A pantry here would be useful, she noted. The windows should be slightly larger to let in more light. A root cellar positioned on the north side would stay cooler in summer. He listened to everything, asked questions, and she could see him adjusting his vision to incorporate ideas that had never occurred to him. They sat on the porch frame afterward, legs dangling over the edge, sharing the lunch she had packed. The land stretched out before them, peaceful and full of possibility. "This is a good place," Penelope said, watching a hawk circle overhead. "You chose well." "I think so." Lucas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I bought this land thinking I'd build a life here alone. Work it, improve it, maybe take on a hired hand eventually. But lately I've been imagining it different." Penelope's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. "How different?" "Imagining someone else here with me. Someone to build this life alongside. Not just live in the house I built, but help make it a home worth building." He turned to look at her, and his gray eyes were serious. "I'm not a man who speaks fancy words, Penelope, but I care for you deeply, and I'd like to know if you might consider a future that included this land and this house and me." She had known this was coming, had felt it building in every conversation, every shared silence, every time his hand brushed hers as they walked. But hearing it spoken aloud still made her breath catch. She looked out at the land, at the house he was building with his own hands, at the life he was offering, and felt the full weight of what he was asking. "I care for you too," she said carefully. "But you should know, Lucas, I'm not a woman who needs to be taken care of. I can support myself, have done so for years. I don't come to you requiring rescue." "I know that." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "That's one of the things I admire most about you. You're capable and strong, and you don't ask for what you don't need. But Penelope, marriage isn't about one person rescuing another. It's about two people choosing to build something together that's stronger than what either could build alone." She turned to him then, really looked at him, this man who understood her in ways no one ever had. "You're right," she said softly. "It is." "So is that a yes?" "That's a yes." His smile was brilliant, and he stood pulling her up with him, and kissed her there on the unfinished porch with the Texas sun warm on their faces and the future spreading out before them like the land itself, full of promise and possibility. They were married 4 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church on 8th Street, with Mrs. Yang and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses and half the town in attendance because Lucas was respected and Penelope had earned her place in the community through steady work and quiet competence. She wore a dress of cream silk that Mrs. Yang had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Lucas wore a new suit that actually fit his broad shoulders. When they exchanged vows, his hands were steady and his voice was clear, and Penelope felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house because the ranch house was not yet finished, but Lucas had arranged for the best room, the one with the large bed and the windows that overlooked the garden. He was gentle and patient, and Penelope felt cherished in a way that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with partnership. In the morning, they rode out to the ranch together with her belongings packed on a mule. All the worldly goods that had fit in one carpet bag now expanded to include kitchen supplies, linens, and the household items they would need. The house was still not finished, but Lucas had completed 2 rooms and made them livable. The bedroom with a real bed frame and mattress, and the kitchen with a stove and a table he had built himself. "It's not much yet," he said, carrying her bags inside. "It's perfect," Penelope corrected. looking around at the clean, swept floors and the wildflowers he had placed in a jar on the table. It's ours, and that makes it perfect. They settled into married life with the same steady determination they each brought to everything else. Lucas worked the ranch, tending his small herd of cattle and breaking ground for crops. Penelope continued her work with Mrs. Yang 3 days a week, riding into town on the gentle mare Lucas had given her as a wedding gift, and spent the other days working on the house and garden. She discovered that Lucas had not exaggerated his skill with carpentry. He worked on the house every spare moment, and she found herself working alongside him, learning to handle tools, to measure and cut with precision. He taught her without condescension, showing her techniques and then stepping back to let her figure out the rest herself. Together they raised walls, installed windows, and built cabinets with dovetailed corners that would last generations. In the evenings they sat on the growing porch and talked about their days, shared observations about the land and the weather, planned for the future in practical terms that nevertheless held dreams within them. Lucas wanted to expand the herd, maybe try breeding horses. Penelope thought they should plant an orchard on the south slope where the drainage was good. "You should do what you want with your wages from Mrs. Yang," Lucas told her one evening, rocking slowly in the chair he had just finished building. "That's your money earned by your work. Invest it how you see fit." "It's our money now," Penelope said. "We're building this together." "No." He was gentle but firm. "You keep your own account, Penelope. I mean that. You never have to ask me for money or justify how you spend what you earn. That was important to you before we married, and it should stay important." She looked at him in the fading light. This man who understood that independence was not the opposite of partnership, but rather its foundation. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." "I do know." He reached over and took her hand. "That's why I said it." Summer deepened into the fierce heat of July and August. They worked in the early mornings and late evenings, resting during the worst of the afternoon heat. The cattle prospered. The garden produced more vegetables than they could eat. And Penelope learned to can and preserve with guidance from Mrs. Henderson, who visited one Sunday and stayed for supper, declaring that Lucas had chosen well and that Penelope had civilized him considerably. In September, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She sat with the knowledge for 3 days before telling Lucas, wanting to be certain, wanting to understand her own feelings about this change that she had not actively sought but found herself welcoming. When she finally told him, over breakfast on a cool morning with the windows open to let in the breeze, he went very still. "A baby," he said, and his voice was filled with wonder. "Penelope, that's wonderful. How are you feeling?" "I'm well. Tired in the mornings, but well." She watched his face carefully. "I know we didn't discuss this, didn't plan for it quite so soon." "Life doesn't wait for plans," he said, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair and take both her hands in his. "But this is good news, the best news. Are you happy about it?" She considered the question seriously, as she considered everything. "Yes," she said finally. "I am. I didn't know I would be, but I am." "Then I'm happy too." He kissed her hands, then her forehead, then her mouth. "We'll need to finish the third bedroom sooner rather than later, and I should start building a cradle." Over the following months, the house took on new urgency in Lucas's work. He completed the third bedroom, built shelves and a wardrobe, installed a larger stove in the kitchen that would heat more efficiently. Penelope continued working in town until December, when the morning sickness that had mostly spared her suddenly caught up with her, and Mrs. Yang insisted she stay home and rest. "You've trained young Clara well enough to handle your work," Mrs. Yang told her firmly, "and you've saved enough that you don't need the wages right now. Take care of yourself and that baby." So Penelope stayed at the ranch, working at a slower pace on the household tasks that never seemed to end. Lucas watched her like a hawk, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if he could do more. She found his attention touching even when it bordered on excessive. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she told him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. I know that, but you're carrying our child, and I want to make sure you have everything you need. What I need, she said, taking the basket from him with a smile, is for you to trust that I'll ask for help if I need it. I promise I will, Lucas, but I also need to stay active and useful. It's who I am. He considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, but you will tell me if anything feels wrong? The moment anything feels wrong, you'll be the first to know. The baby was born on a cold night in early March 1879, with Mrs. Henderson attending and Lucas pacing holes in the porch until the first cry split the night air. It was a boy, healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him James, after Lucas's father, and when Lucas held him for the first time, Penelope saw tears slip down his weathered cheeks. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with the same careful attention he gave everything precious. "You're perfect. Thank you." "We made him together," Penelope said, exhausted but content. "He's ours." The next few months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, the endless demands of a newborn that left them both exhausted but somehow more connected than ever. They took turns walking James when he was fussy, worked together to establish routines, marveled at every small change and development. Lucas proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle, singing old songs his own mother had taught him, talking to James about the ranch and the cattle as if the baby understood every word. Penelope found motherhood both harder and more rewarding than she had anticipated. The loss of independence chafed at first the constant need to be available, to put someone else's needs before her own. But gradually she found a new rhythm, discovered that she could still be herself while also being a mother, that the two identities were not mutually exclusive but rather complementary. When James was 6 months old, she returned to working with Mrs. Yang one day a week, bringing the baby with her. Mrs. Yang set up a cradle in the corner of the shop, and James became the unofficial mascot, sleeping peacefully through the sounds of scissors and sewing machines, occasionally waking to be fed or changed before settling again. Lucas continued to improve the ranch, expanding the herd, building better outbuildings, gradually transforming the raw land into a working operation that turned a modest profit. He hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavy work, which gave him more time to spend with Penelope and James, to be present for the small moments that made up a life. On their second wedding anniversary, they sat on the completed porch with James sleeping in Penelope's arms, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The house was finished now, solid and comfortable, with the orchard Penelope had wanted planted on the south slope, young trees that would bear fruit in a few more years. "Do you remember when you first showed me this land?" Penelope asked softly, not wanting to wake the baby. "I remember everything about that day." Lucas rocked slowly in his chair, one hand reaching over to rest on her knee. "I was terrified you'd say no." "I was terrified I'd say yes," she admitted. "I'd spent so long taking care of only myself, not depending on anyone, not asking for anything I couldn't provide alone. The idea of partnership, of building something with someone else, it scared me more than I wanted to admit. And now?" She looked at him, at the house they had built together, at the child in her arms that was proof of their union, at the life they had created through mutual effort and respect and love. "Now I can't imagine having done it any other way. You gave me more than I ever knew to ask for, Lucas. Not because you thought I needed rescue, but because you wanted to build something beautiful together." "You did the same for me," he said quietly. "I thought I wanted a simple life, just me and my work and the land. But you showed me that life is richer when it's shared, that strength comes in partnership, not isolation." James stirred in Penelope's arms, making small sounds that would soon become demands for feeding. She adjusted him gently, feeling the weight of him, the absolute trust he placed in them to meet his needs. It was humbling and empowering at the same time. "I'm going to teach him what you taught me," Lucas said, watching his son with an expression of such tenderness that Penelope's throat tightened. that providing for someone and respecting their independence aren't contradictory, that real partnership means giving freely without keeping score. And I'll teach him what you taught me, Penelope added, that accepting help isn't weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone care for you. They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded, the sounds of evening settling around them, cattle lowing in the distance, crickets beginning their nightly chorus. This was what they had built, not just a house or a ranch or a family, but a life based on mutual respect and love freely given. As the years passed, the ranch prospered beyond what Lucas had initially dreamed. The cattle herd grew to over 200 head, and his reputation for quality stock spread throughout central Texas. He hired 2 more hands, built a proper bunkhouse for them, and Penelope took over managing the household accounts with the same careful attention to detail she brought to everything else. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's determination and his father's even temperament. He learned to walk by pulling himself up on the porch railing, took his first steps across the kitchen floor into Penelope's waiting arms, and spoke his first word, "Da," while Lucas was teaching him the names of the horses in the barn. When James was 2 years old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was less afraid of how motherhood would change her. Lucas was just as attentive, but more confident, and together they prepared for the arrival of a second child with practiced efficiency. Their daughter was born in October 1881, during a brief cool spell that broke the late summer heat. She came into the world quietly, without the dramatic announcement her brother had made, and she gazed up at them with serious dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. They named her Rose, after Penelope's mother, and James was immediately fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to touch her face, bring her his toys, include her in his toddler games even though she could do nothing but eat and sleep. With 2 children, the household became busier, more chaotic, filled with the sounds of laughter and crying and the endless questions of a curious 2-year-old. Penelope juggled nursing Rose and chasing James, managing the house, and helping with ranch accounts, and sometimes felt stretched thin in ways she never had before. But Lucas stepped in without being asked, taking James on rides around the property, handling the evening routine so she could rest, doing dishes and laundry without complaint. "You don't have to do all this," Penelope told him one evening, finding him scrubbing pots at the kitchen sink while she rocked Rose to sleep. "I know I don't have to," he said, glancing over his shoulder with a smile. "But we're in this together, remember? That means when you're overwhelmed, I step up. Same as you do when I'm overwhelmed with ranch work." It was this attitude, this fundamental understanding of partnership as mutual support rather than defined roles, that made their marriage not just functional, but joyful. They argued sometimes, inevitable differences of opinion about money or child rearing or ranch management, but they had learned to disagree respectfully, to listen to each other's perspectives, to compromise when possible, and defer to expertise when necessary. The ranch continued to grow. Lucas expanded into horse breeding, working with a line of sturdy quarter horses that were perfect for ranch work and sold well to other cattlemen. Penelope took over more of the business operations, discovering she had a knack for negotiation and record-keeping that made their operation more efficient and profitable. She still did occasional work for Mrs. Yang, more for the satisfaction of using her skills than for financial necessity, and the connection to town kept her from feeling too isolated on the ranch. James started school when he turned 6, riding into Austin 3 days a week with his mother, attending the small schoolhouse on 10th Street. He was a bright child, quick with numbers and fascinated by reading, and his teacher, Miss Anderson, told Penelope he had real academic potential if they chose to nurture it. "He could go to university someday," Miss Anderson said earnestly. "You should start planning for that possibility." Penelope and Lucas discussed it that evening, sitting on their porch as they had done so many times over the years. Rose was playing at their feet, building towers with wooden blocks Lucas had carved for her. "I never had much schooling beyond the basics," Lucas admitted, "but I don't want that for James. If he has the ability and the desire to learn, we should support it. University is expensive, Penelope said practically. We'd need to start saving now. Then we start saving? He looked at her seriously. Both our children should have opportunities we didn't have, Penelope. That's part of what we're building here. Not just a ranch, but a foundation for them to build their own lives on. So they began setting aside money specifically for the children's education, separate from the ranch accounts. Penelope took on more bookkeeping work from other ranchers, managing accounts for 3 neighboring spreads and earning good wages for her expertise. Lucas sold off some of the older cattle and invested in younger, more productive stock that would increase the herd's value over time. The years accumulated into a life well lived. James grew tall and serious, more interested in books than cattle, but still a competent ranch hand when needed. Rose developed into a spirited child with her father's gray eyes and her mother's independence, equally comfortable in the kitchen or the barn, insisting on helping with everything and refusing to be limited by expectations of what girls should or shouldn't do. In 1887, when James was 8 and Rose was 6, Penelope's work with ranch accounts had expanded to the point where she was managing books for over a dozen operations in the county. She set up a small office in town, renting a room above the general store, and spent 2 full days each week there, meeting with ranchers and going over figures. Lucas supported this expansion completely, proud of her success, never once suggesting she should focus only on home and children. You're building your own legacy, he told her one evening, reviewing the figures she had prepared for a neighboring rancher's loan application. This is important work, Penelope. You're helping these operations stay solvent, keep families fed. That matters. It does matter, she agreed, pleased that he understood. And it uses skills I might have lost otherwise. I love being a mother and a wife, Lucas, but I also love having work that's mine, that challenges me in different ways. I know that's part of who you are, and I wouldn't want you to be any different. Their partnership had deepened over the years into something that went beyond romance or even love, though both were certainly present. It was a fundamental compatibility, a matching of values and goals and approaches to life that made them stronger together than they could ever have been apart. They still had physical passion, still reached for each other in the night with desire and tenderness, but they also had friendship and respect, and the kind of trust that comes from years of proving yourself reliable. In 1889, Lucas's herd suffered an outbreak of tick fever that killed 20 head and sickened dozens more. It was a devastating blow, both financially and emotionally, and Penelope watched her husband struggle with the loss, blaming himself for not catching the signs sooner, not taking preventative measures more seriously. She didn't try to tell him it wasn't his fault or minimize the loss. Instead, she sat with him while he grieved, helped him develop a plan for recovery, and quietly arranged to sell some of her own investments to provide operating capital until the herd could be rebuilt. When he discovered what she had done, Lucas tried to refuse the money. "That's yours, Penelope, your security. I can't take it." "It's ours," she corrected firmly. "That's what partnership means, Lucas. When one of us falls, the other holds us up. You've done it for me countless times. Let me do it for you now." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the struggle in his eyes, the pride that wanted to refuse warring with the practicality that knew they needed the help. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we pay it back with interest. This is a loan, not a gift." "Agreed." She held out her hand, and they shook on it formally, sealing the arrangement with the same seriousness they brought to business dealings with outsiders. The herd recovered over the next year, and Lucas implemented new health protocols that prevented any recurrence of the fever. True to his word, he repaid Penelope's investment with interest, transferring the funds back into her account with meticulous record-keeping. But something had shifted between them through that crisis, a deepening of trust that came from being tested and not found wanting. "I used to think asking for help was weakness," Lucas told her one evening, watching the sunset from their porch. James was at the barn, tending to evening chores, and Rose was inside, practicing her letters. "My father's death forced me to be self-sufficient young, and I took pride in never needing anyone. But you've shown me that real strength is knowing when to ask for help and being wise enough to accept it when it's offered." "You taught me the same thing," Penelope said, leaning against his shoulder. I came to Texas determined to need nothing from anyone to prove I could survive alone. But survival isn't the same as living. And living fully requires connection, requires letting people in even when it's scary. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade over land they had worked and improved and made their own. The house had grown over the years, another bedroom added when a third pregnancy had resulted in twin boys who arrived in 1885 and immediately doubled the chaos in the household. Daniel and Matthew were 4 now, identical in appearance, but distinctly different in personality, and they kept everyone running from dawn to dusk. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked suddenly. "The life you might have had if you'd stayed in Ohio or gone somewhere else instead of Austin?" Penelope considered the question seriously, as she always did. "No," she said finally. "I don't believe in regret for choices that were the best I could make with the information I had at the time. I came to Austin because it seemed like a place where I could start fresh, and I was right. I married you because you offered partnership instead of possession, and I was right about that too. This life we've built, it's not perfect, but it's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for any imagined alternative." "I'm glad," he said quietly, "because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You made me better, Penelope, made me think bigger, dream wider, understand that success isn't measured just in acres and cattle, but in relationships and family, and the legacy we leave for our children." The children were indeed their greatest legacy. James entered the University of Texas in 1891, the first member of either of their families to pursue higher education. He studied agricultural science, planning to bring modern techniques back to the ranch, and wrote home weekly with enthusiastic letters about his classes and discoveries. Rose, at 10, had announced her intention to become a veterinarian, scandalizing some of the more traditional townspeople but earning fierce support from her parents. "If that's what you want, then that's what you'll work toward," Penelope told her daughter firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you there are limits based on your sex. I built a successful business, despite people thinking women couldn't handle financial matters. You can do the same in your field." The twins were still young enough that their futures were unclear, but Daniel showed an artistic talent that surprised everyone, drawing detailed pictures of the ranch animals with careful attention to proportion and shading. Matthew was fascinated by machines, taking apart and reassembling anything mechanical he could get his hands on, usually improving it in the process. "We've raised free thinkers," Lucas observed one evening, watching Matthew explain his latest invention, a modified gate latch that could be operated from horseback. "I'm not sure whether to be proud or terrified." "Both," Penelope said with a laugh. "Definitely both." As the 1890s progressed, Austin grew from a frontier town into a proper city. Electric lights appeared on Congress Avenue, the Capitol building was completed in all its pink granite glory, and the university expanded to become a significant institution. Lucas and Penelope's ranch was now considered one of the more established operations in the county, and they found themselves consulted by younger ranchers starting out, asked for advice on everything from breeding stock to business management. Penelope's bookkeeping business had grown to the point where she employed 2 assistants, young women she trained in accounting and financial management. She took pride in giving them the same opportunities she had received, teaching them not just skills but confidence, the understanding that they could be financially independent if they chose to be. In 1895, on their 17th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised her with a trip to San Antonio, their first vacation alone together since James's birth. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson and Tom, who had been promoted to ranch foreman years earlier, and took the train south for a week of exploration and rest. They walked along the river walk, visited the Alamo, ate in restaurants where they didn't have to cook or clean up afterward, and spent long hours simply talking without interruption. In their hotel room at night, they rediscovered each other with the leisure of having no children to interrupt, no pressing ranch business to handle in the morning. "This is nice," Penelope said, lying in his arms on their last night in San Antonio, "but I'll be glad to get home." "Me too," Lucas kissed her temple. "I miss the kids, miss the ranch. But it's good to remember we're still us, not just parents and business owners, but Lucas and Penelope, the people who fell in love on an unfinished porch." "We're definitely still us," she agreed. "Just expanded versions with more responsibilities and deeper understanding. I love the life we built, Lucas. I love that we built it together as equals. They returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly, the children healthy and happy, and a new foal in the barn that Matthew insisted on naming Einstein after a scientist he had read about. Life continued its steady rhythm, the cycle of seasons and years marked by births and birthdays, weddings and funerals, the constant work of maintaining and improving what they had built. James graduated from university in 1896 and returned to the ranch with ideas for implementing new breeding techniques and crop rotation systems. He worked alongside his father, and Penelope watched with satisfaction as Lucas incorporated his son's modern knowledge with his own practical experience. Rose, at 15, had begun apprenticing with the local veterinarian, learning animal medicine with the same focused determination she brought to everything. The twins were 11 now, Daniel selling his drawings to neighbors, and Matthew already talking about going to engineering school. In 1898, when Penelope was 43 years old, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. It seemed like half the county attended, filling the house and overflowing onto the expanded porch and yard. Mrs. Yang was there, now retired but still sharp. Mrs. Henderson came, now in her 70s but still running the boarding house with an iron will. Tom stood up and gave a toast about watching Lucas transform from a solitary rancher into a family man, and how Penelope had civilized the whole operation without domesticating anyone. Standing on the porch that evening, surrounded by children and friends and the evidence of 2 decades of work, Penelope felt a profound sense of contentment. Not complacency, she still had goals and plans and work she wanted to do, but a deep satisfaction with what had been accomplished. Lucas found her there in the crowd and pulled her aside, leading her away from the party to the quiet of the barn. In the dim light filtering through the door, with the sounds of celebration muted by distance, he took both her hands in his. "I wanted a moment alone with you," he said, "to tell you properly, and without audience, how grateful I am for these 20 years. You could have said no that day I invited you to supper. You could have chosen a different path at a dozen different points, but you didn't. You chose this, chose us, and you've made every day since then better than I had any right to expect." "You did the same for me," Penelope said, squeezing his hands. "I came to Austin expecting to live a quiet, independent life. Comfortable but solitary. You showed me that partnership doesn't require giving up independence, that I could be fully myself and fully yours at the same time. That was a gift beyond measure, Lucas. We gave each other the same gift then. Freedom within commitment. Trust within love." He kissed her there in the barn, where they had shared so many working moments over the years, and Penelope thought about how this was the real foundation of their marriage. Not the dramatic moments of crisis or celebration, but the daily choice to honor each other, to work together, to build something lasting through consistent, patient effort. The party continued late into the night, and the next morning, as they cleaned up the remnants with the children's help, Penelope looked around at her family and felt the full weight of gratitude. James, now a grown man of 21, discussing breeding strategies with his father. Rose, 16 and confident, already planning her future. The twins, inseparable and inventive, building something incomprehensible in the corner with leftover party decorations. This was what she and Lucas had created. Not just children, but independent, capable people who understood that they could pursue their own dreams while remaining connected to family. It was the same balance she and Lucas had struck, autonomy within relationship, and she was fiercely proud that they had managed to pass that understanding to the next generation. The turn of the century came with both celebration and reflection. Penelope was now 44, Lucas 47, and they had been married for 22 years. The ranch was prosperous and well-established. Their children were launched or launching into their own lives. Penelope's bookkeeping business continued to thrive, providing financial services to over 30 ranches now, and she had trained 6 young women in accounting practices. "We should write it down," Lucas said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing ranch accounts. Our story, I mean. How we started, what we built, the principles that guided us, for the children and grandchildren so they understand where they came from. That's a good idea, Penelope said, considering it. Not a boastful history, but an honest accounting of choices and consequences, successes and failures. So they began writing together, trading the pen back and forth, each adding their perspective on events they had shared. It became a project that spanned several months, filling a leather-bound journal with their combined history. They wrote about meeting in Mrs. Yang's shop, that first supper, the half-finished house, the decision to marry. They wrote about the children's births, the tick fever crisis, the growth of both the ranch and Penelope's business. But most importantly, they wrote about the philosophy that had guided them, the understanding that partnership meant supporting each other's independence rather than limiting it. Lucas wrote about learning that providing for his family didn't mean controlling them. Penelope wrote about discovering that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. Together, they articulated something that had been lived rather than spoken, a model of marriage based on mutual respect and shared growth. "This is for you," Lucas wrote in the final entry, addressing their children and future descendants directly. "Your mother and I built something here that we're proud of, but the land and the business aren't the important part. The important part is how we built it, with respect and trust and love that enhanced rather than limited each other. That's the real inheritance we want to leave you. Build your own lives the same way, whatever form those lives take." They finished the journal in the spring of 1901 and placed it in the safe where they kept important documents. James read it first and came out of the office with tears in his eyes. "That's beautiful," he said simply, "and it explains so much about how you raised us, why you always supported even our craziest dreams. You really meant it, that we should build our own lives." "Of course we meant it," Penelope said. "That's the whole point. We built this foundation so you'd have something to stand on while you reached for your own goals, not so you'd be trapped here doing what we did." Rose read it next and emerged even more determined to pursue veterinary medicine, inspired by her mother's example of building a career despite social expectations. The twins read it together as they did most things, and seemed to take from it permission to pursue their very different interests without feeling they had to follow a predetermined path. As the years continued into the new century, the Sterling Ranch evolved with the times. Lucas and James implemented modern ranching techniques, improving both efficiency and animal welfare. They were early adopters of barbed wire fencing, better breeding practices, and scientific approaches to land management. The ranch became known throughout Texas as a model operation, and both father and son were frequently invited to speak at agricultural conferences. Penelope's business continued to expand, and in 1903 she opened a formal office in downtown Austin, employing 5 women full-time and consulting for over 50 ranches and businesses. She was frequently the only woman in business meetings, and while some men initially doubted her competence, her track record spoke for itself. She had helped dozens of operations avoid bankruptcy, optimize their finances, and plan for long-term sustainability. Rose completed her apprenticeship and in 1904 was admitted to the Ontario Veterinary College in Canada, one of the few institutions that accepted women at the time. It meant she would be gone for 2 years, and Penelope felt the absence keenly, but she was immensely proud of her daughter's determination and courage. "You're following your path," Penelope told her on the day Rose left for Canada. "That's all I ever wanted for you. Follow it all the way, wherever it leads." "I learned that from you," Rose said, hugging her mother tightly. "You and Dad both. You showed us that having a family doesn't mean giving up who you are. I want that kind of partnership someday, what you two have." "You'll find it," Penelope assured her. "Someone who sees your strength and celebrates it rather than trying to diminish it. That person exists, and you'll recognize them when you meet them." The twins went their separate ways after finishing school, Daniel to study art in New York, and Matthew to pursue engineering in Boston. For the first time in over 20 years, Penelope and Lucas found themselves alone in the house they had built together. The silence felt strange initially, but they quickly adjusted to having time for each other again, rediscovering the couple they had been before children filled every hour. "I miss them," Lucas admitted one evening. Sitting on the porch, they had expanded multiple times over the years to accommodate their growing family. But I'm also enjoying this, having you to myself again. I feel the same way, Penelope said. I love our children, am proud of everything they're doing, but it's good to remember we're still us, still Lucas and Penelope, still building our life together. They traveled more in those years, taking trips to see the children, visiting new places they had always wanted to explore. They went to the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904, marveling at the innovations on display. They traveled to New York to see Daniel's first gallery show, his drawings and paintings of Texas ranch life earning critical praise. They visited Matthew in Boston and let him explain the principles of the new internal combustion engines he was working with, understanding perhaps one word in 10, but proud of his passion and expertise. Through it all, the ranch remained their anchor, the place they always returned to, the physical manifestation of everything they had built together. Lucas was now in his 50s, his hair gray and his hands marked with the scars of decades of work, but he was still strong and capable. Penelope was approaching 50, her face lined with years of sun and smiling, her hair now more silver than blonde, but her mind was as sharp as ever and her energy undiminished. In 1906, James married a school teacher named Emily, and they built a house on the ranch property, starting their own family while helping manage the operation. It was exactly what Lucas had hoped for. Continuity without stagnation, the ranch passing to the next generation while still allowing everyone involved to pursue their own interests. Emily was a gentle woman with a quick intelligence that Penelope immediately appreciated, and watching her son build his own partnership gave Penelope deep satisfaction. Rose returned from Canada in 1906 with her veterinary degree and immediately established a practice in Austin, one of the first female veterinarians in Texas. She faced considerable skepticism initially, but her skill quickly won over even the most doubtful ranchers. Within a year, she had more business than she could handle and had to hire an assistant. The twins returned home for visits regularly, but had clearly found their callings elsewhere. Daniel's art was gaining recognition, his depictions of ranch life and Texas landscapes selling to collectors across the country. Matthew was working for an automobile manufacturer, helping design engines that were more efficient and reliable. Both wrote frequently, and their letters were full of enthusiasm for their work and gratitude for the support they had received. "We did it right," Lucas said one evening in 1908, reading the latest batch of letters from their scattered children. "They're all doing what they love, building lives that matter to them. That's what success looks like." "It is," Penelope agreed, "and they're all maintaining good relationships with each other and with us. We didn't just raise them to be independent, we raised them to value connection even within that independence." That year, James and Emily welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Penelope after her grandmother. Holding the baby, seeing her name carried forward, Penelope felt the turning of generations in a tangible way. She was a grandmother now, entering a new phase of life, and she found she was ready for it, ready to step back from the daily intensity of raising children and into the more relaxed role of providing wisdom and support without primary responsibility. The ranch celebrated its 30th anniversary under Lucas's ownership in 1909, and they marked the occasion with another large gathering. But this time, the celebration was as much about community as family. Lucas had become a respected elder statesman in ranching circles, frequently consulted about land management and cattle breeding. Penelope's business had helped stabilize the finances of countless operations, and she was recognized as one of the most successful businesswomen in Texas. During the party, the mayor of Austin made a surprise appearance and presented them with a proclamation recognizing their contributions to the region's economic development and their modeling of progressive family and business practices. It was an honor neither had sought, but standing together as the mayor read the proclamation, Penelope felt a surge of pride not just in what they had accomplished, but in how they had accomplished it, with integrity and mutual respect. That evening, after everyone had left, and they were alone on the porch watching the stars emerge, Lucas took her hand as he had done countless times over the past 31 years. "I have something I've been wanting to say," he told her, "and I keep putting it off because it never seems like the right time, but maybe there's never a perfect time for important things." "What is it?" Penelope asked, hearing the serious note in his voice. "I want to make sure you know that you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Not just because of the children or the ranch or any of the tangible things we built, but because you made me better. You challenged me to think beyond myself, to see partnership as expansion rather than limitation. You never asked me for more than you gave, but you inspired me to give more than I knew I had to offer. That's been the greatest gift of my life, Penelope, getting to build this life alongside you." She felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the depth of emotion in his voice. "I could say the same words back to you," she said softly. "You gave me more than I ever knew to ask for, Lucas. Not material things, though we've been fortunate in that regard, but security and respect and a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished me. You made space for me to be fully myself while also being fully yours. That's rare. Maybe rarer than we realized at the time. We were lucky, he said. Lucky to find each other, lucky to recognize what we had, lucky to build on it year after year." "It wasn't just luck," Penelope corrected gently. "It was choice. We chose each other, and then we chose each other again every day after that. In the hard moments and the easy ones, we kept choosing partnership and respect and love. That's not luck, Lucas. That's commitment." They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands clasped, watching the night deepen over land they had worked for decades. In the house behind them, their grown son and his wife were putting their granddaughter to bed, the next generation establishing their own patterns and traditions. In cities across the country, their other children were building lives that reflected the values they had learned here: independence within connection, ambition within ethics. This was their legacy, Penelope thought. Not the land or the buildings or even the business, though all of those mattered. Their real legacy was a model of how to live with integrity, how to partner with respect, how to build something lasting through patience and commitment and love. The years continued to unfold, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Lucas's health began to decline in his late 50s. Nothing dramatic, but the accumulation of decades of hard physical labor. His knees ached in cold weather, and he moved more slowly than before. He handed over more of the daily ranch operations to James, but remained actively involved in planning and decision-making. Penelope's bookkeeping business continued to thrive, and she began training her eventual successor, a young woman named Margaret, who had the same sharp mind and ethical approach that Penelope valued. She was thinking about retirement, not because she was tired of the work, but because she wanted more time for other pursuits, reading and traveling, and simply being present for the small moments of daily life. In 1912, Rose married a fellow veterinarian she had met through her practice, a man named David, who shared her passion for animal medicine and her progressive views about women's roles in society. The wedding was a joyful affair, and Penelope felt deep satisfaction watching her daughter marry someone who clearly viewed her as an equal partner. "He reminds me of you," Penelope told Lucas during the reception, watching Rose and David dance. "The way he looks at her, with pride and respect, not possession. She found what we have." "She learned what to look for by watching us," Lucas said. "That's worth more than any inheritance we could leave her." The twins both found their own paths to partnership as well. Daniel married a fellow artist, and they established a studio together in Santa Fe, creating and selling work collaboratively. Matthew married an engineer, and they went into business together, designing automotive components. Both couples modeled the same principles of mutual respect and shared ambition that they had seen in their parents' marriage. James and Emily had 3 more children, filling the ranch with the sounds of the next generation. Penelope loved being a grandmother, the ability to enjoy children without the constant responsibility of their care. She and Lucas spoiled their grandchildren appropriately, teaching them to ride, telling them stories about the old days, passing down the history and values that mattered. In 1915, on their 37th wedding anniversary, Penelope and Lucas took a trip to the land where it had all started, the place he had shown her when they were courting. The house they had built together still stood solid, expanded over the years but maintaining its original foundation. They walked through it together, remembering. "This room is where James was born," Penelope said, standing in what was now a guest bedroom. "I was terrified, but you sat right outside that door the whole time, waiting." "This was where I proposed," Lucas said, leading her to the porch. "Right here, where I told you I wanted to build a life with you, not for you." "Best decision I ever made," Penelope said, leaning into his shoulder. "Saying yes to you, to this life, to building something together." They stayed up late that night, talking about everything and nothing, the way they had done for nearly 4 decades. Lucas was 62 now, Penelope 58, and they had lived a full life together, marked by hard work, mutual respect, deep love, and the kind of partnership that had allowed both to flourish as individuals while growing together as a unit. "If I could go back," Lucas said as they prepared for bed, "knowing everything that would happen, all the challenges and joys and years of work, I wouldn't change a single thing. This life we built, it's exactly what I would choose again." "Same for me," Penelope said. "Every hard moment, every triumph, every ordinary day, all of it together created something beautiful. I wouldn't trade it for anything." The next decade brought more changes. Lucas's health continued its gradual decline, and in 1920, at 67, he suffered a heart episode that left him weakened. He recovered but never quite regained his former vigor. James took over full management of the ranch, though Lucas remained involved in an advisory capacity, and Penelope found herself spending more time at home, wanting to be near her husband, not wanting to miss whatever time they had remaining. Penelope herself dealt with her own health challenges, arthritis, that made her beautiful needlework more difficult, though her mind remained sharp and she continued to consult on complex financial matters for long-standing clients. She officially retired from daily business operations in 1922, turning her firm over to Margaret, who had proven herself more than capable of carrying on the work. They spent their final years together in quiet contentment, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching the ranch continue to prosper under James's management, seeing the next generation begin to establish themselves. Rose's veterinary practice was now the largest in Central Texas. Daniel's art was displayed in museums. Matthew had several patents on automotive innovations. Each had built lives that reflected their own passions while maintaining strong connections to family and the values they had learned growing up. Lucas died peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at 72 with Penelope beside him. She woke in the dark hours before dawn to find him gone, his hand still warm in hers, his expression peaceful. The grief was profound, but not unexpected, and she bore it with the same quiet strength she had brought to everything else in her life. The funeral was attended by hundreds, ranchers and business people, friends and family, testament to the life Lucas had lived and the respect he had earned. Penelope stood between her children as they lowered her husband into the Texas soil he had worked for so many decades, and she felt both the weight of loss and the comfort of knowing that their time together had been well lived, fully realized, exactly what they had both chosen. She lived another 8 years after Lucas's death, remaining in the ranch house, helping Emily with the grandchildren, serving as the family matriarch and keeper of history. She completed the journal that she and Lucas had started, adding the final chapters, making sure the story was complete for future generations. She wrote about their last years together, the gradual transition from active work to advisory roles, the satisfaction of watching their legacy continue through their children. "We were blessed," she wrote in the final entry, her handwriting less steady now but still clear. "Not because life was easy or without challenge, but because we faced everything together as true partners. Lucas gave me more than I ever asked for, not through grand gestures, but through daily respect, consistent support, and unwavering faith in my abilities. And I like to think I gave him the same. That's what love is in the end. Not needing the other person to complete you, but choosing to build something together that's richer than what either could create alone. We built that, Lucas and I, and it stands as our greatest achievement." Penelope Bradford Sterling died in her sleep in 1933 at 76 years old, surrounded by 3 generations of family. They buried her beside Lucas on the ranch they had built together, under the wide Texas sky they had both loved. The ranch continued under James's management, then passed to his children, each generation building on the foundation that Lucas and Penelope had established, maintaining not just the land and business, but the principles of partnership and respect that had always been the real inheritance. Years later, when the grandchildren found the journal their grandparents had written, they recognized it for what it was. Not just a family history, but a roadmap for how to live with integrity, how to love with respect, how to build something lasting through commitment and choice. The story of the woman who never asked for more than given, and the cowboy who gave her more than she'd ever asked became a family legend, told and retold, adapted to each new generation, but always maintaining its essential truth that the strongest partnerships are built on mutual respect, that real love enhances rather than limits, and that the best legacy is teaching others to build their own lives with the same courage and commitment